Welcome.
Thank you. Nice introduction.
Oh, thank you. I hope you don't mind some of it. Well, thanks for joining us, Manny. Really excited to be able to speak with you. Let me start by asking, as I said, the company has grown a lot under your leadership. I'm curious if over the time that you've been CEO, how your view of sustainability has changed over that time.
Well, I think put things in perspective. I guess I started my business career in the 80s, you know, the roaring 80s. Milton Friedman basically said the sole responsibility of companies was to maximize profits for the shareholders and grow the company. And I think you could see how that philosophy has changed over time with Blackstone, Larry Fink, a number of investors really talking about social purpose and talking about that your constituency is larger, your stakeholders are larger than just your stockholders, principally your employers, your consumers, and the communities where you operate. But I always, which is all great, but if you don't have financial performance, nothing else matters. You could be running the greatest organization from a people's point of view, but if you're not delivering the financial results, you're not going to be able to do the good that you want to do. So I think it's really a marriage of the two, but we still live in a capitalistic society, which is driven by profitability and returns on results.
How have you, so that's your view as a CEO. What about as a person? So why does sustainability?
I'm not as good a person. No. Really,
I think you're good. You're good at both. What is your personal view of sustainability? What does sustainability mean to you, not just as CEO, but also in terms of how you want to see the world evolve?
Look, I think you have to be measured by more than just your bottom line. And I think I would say is, talking about my background, I'm born and raised, I'm a kid from the Bronx, obviously you can tell from the accent. And I grew up very Catholic and grew up like that 60s, 70s period where Catholic social justice was forefront in my development. So that was always there, this idea that as you're going through life, the more that you're given, the more that's required of you. So I think on a personal level, that's really what's had a big impact on me and guided me as I've tried to go through this and try to bring a balance to what we're trying to do.
How do you look to bridge those two things? So what's personal to you and your role as CEO inside the company? How do those two things fit together? Okay,
that's maybe even on a broader sense. I think is given the landscape that we're operating in, be it the social and political landscape, over the last 10 years, companies and their leaders have been pushed into taking more public stances on issues, and companies having to take public stances on issues. I think you need to be very careful when you do that, because if you get into a really divisive issue, you're basically, at best case scenario, going to alienate 40% of the country or your potential consumer base. And at the same time, you want to really follow your moral compass. So for me, the issue is this issue, whatever this issue might be, is this issue part of our core, part of our business cycle, part of what drives us? So, should PVH be involved in the gun control issue and all that goes involved with that? My opinion is no, it's not central to what we do and where we are. I happen to be on the board of Dick's Sporting Goods that sells firearms, and it's a portion of their business, the hunt and the fish and all of that. And they made a decision that they were going to take a stance on some, what I would, as a New York moderate, I thought was pretty moderate positions, but did inflame 35% of the country, 40% of the country. So, but they felt since this is part of our business, what we do every day, we need to have a position on that. And they took a leadership role, which as a director, I fully supported. I think, for us, the immigration issue is a major issue. Talent, we're a global company with almost 40,000 associates, half of which are outside the United States, and our supply chain, which is a couple of million lives that we touch through our supply chain, with all outside the U.S. principally, 99% of it, is real question there is how do you balance all of this, and especially the rhetoric that's coming out of Washington in particular. It's much more of a challenge as a CEO running a global company, who, as an American company with an American leader, wanting to be loyal to our country on one level, but at the same time, trying to manage the sphere. And when I travel, one of the challenges I always face, I usually get, what's going on? We don't get it at the beginning. Why are we fighting? We're allies. We've been best of allies. It seems what's gone on. So that's a huge challenge that I think multinational CEOs are facing, their own employee base and strategic partnerships.
And as you say, not only the customer base, not only but the employee base is very diverse diverse and also in terms of thinking and so on. So you have to think
diverse
about all
on every level.
Exactly.
We're gender, political affiliation, everything that goes on. You're really needing to manage that diversity, and it's for us. That's become a major issue for us, and we've really focused on inclusion and diversity as a key pillar in our business strategy. I was going to say social responsibility, but our social responsibility initiatives are what we've tried to do, and I think been pretty successful in, is weaving them into our business strategy at the same time. So really dealing with that and the inclusion and diversity issue, talking about unconscious bias, that just, we're all human, and they manage those biases that come up, manifest themselves in ways that we don't even think about, and how they come across, and making people attuned to those things. We have a workforce that's 65% female, vice presidents and above that are 50% female, but the top 5 positions of the company continue to be white males. So still breaking through that glass ceiling is a major initiative for us as we go forward.
Well, let me follow up on that a bit, because I think the performance that PVH has, and I appreciate your candor in talking about the top 5 positions as an important part of that picture. Your board also has pretty good gender diversity.
I think it's 4 out of 11.
Yeah,
quick
unfortunately, compared to most boards, that's higher than you see in most companies. In a country where for the first time, more than 100 women elected to the House of Representatives. It's a great accomplishment. Glass half full, it's 111, never higher than before. Glass a little bit still empty, that's less than, or it's right about a quarter of the House, so still some distance to go. At PVH has, and clearly you're saying that this is something where the work never ends, which I think we all know. Have the achievements that you've made, particularly with respect to gender, have those been part of a concerted effort, or has that just been more of a natural consequence of the way the company works?
No, I think there's I'd love to say it was just the way the company works, and I think there's a piece of that, but it's been a concerted effort. It's been a focal point to level the playing field and make sure decisions are being driven in the right way, making sure you're looking at a broad swath of candidates, internal and external, that are diverse on a number of levels. And I think that's the best you can do. And you don't want to force things, but you do want to create opportunities. And I think mentoring, getting the right support in place, I think is critical. And then fundamentally, for me, you have these moments in your career, and I was a CEO for about a year and a half, and we were talking, we were just getting into what's really developed into a major effort is succession planning, and real succession planning, driving it down into the organization and talking about leadership change. And it just became crystal clear to me, if 65% of your workforce is female and 50% of your vice presidents are female, and you're not moving them through the ranks, you're using a third of your workforce to then build your executive team. That makes no sense at all. So the business case was compelling, and when I went to my senior leadership team, which was more male than female at the time, the business case was, very hard to argue. It's in front of you, and what are we going to do? The white guys in the room all got a little nervous and started, pulling the collar, and what does this mean? When are we picking the drapes out? I'm not sure, but all those stereotypes that come out. But it's really been embraced, I guess I can say, from that point of view.
I'm sure the white guys in your can compete also. So
yeah, they try.
Some of us can anyway. No, that's great, and I think that kind of candor is important. Calling those things out is really important, because making visible in those kinds of decisions the broader set of considerations to make sure that the best people and a diverse pool of people are there. It doesn't happen by accident. I'm not surprised by your answer at all. Let me go back to the question of public issues for just a minute. I saw a very interesting poll a couple of months ago that basically said when companies take stands on political issues, they inflame as many people as they make happy. But when they speak up on the basis of values, actually they win strong support. How do you think about the distinction between values and political issues? Sure,
I think it's an excellent call out, and I think it's also the way you talk about issues. I think there's a way to talk about issues like immigration, like the need for diversity, that doesn't necessarily become overly political and alienates either one side or the other. I think it's quite different when you also talk about it to your core constituency, which is your ownership base, which is your employee base, and you're talking to them about issues and how it impacts us and what we have trade, in particular, and what goes on there, and those issues that you take, and really making a judgment about when do you go truly public and start to make it a company mission externally, and when is it a discussion that you have internally. And what I try to do internally is put forth around our values, our corporate values that we really focus on, put forth an issue, talk about both sides of the issue, and then allow the employee base, our associates, to engage in that discussion, as opposed to, taking a corporate. Now, there's things that are direct. It came to corporate taxes, the tariff and trade situation. I sit on the advisory committee to the president's trade group, and intimately involved in that for the last couple of years. And there, it's mission critical from us to be engaged, take positions about open and free trade, take positions what makes sense. On the border adjustment tax, which would have been a death knell for the retail and apparel industry, and given my background, which is financial, I think as one of the leaders in the industry, I had more credibility to speak about it. And I spent more time in Washington in a 6-month period, meeting with congressional leaders, Treasury Department officials, than I've ever spent in my entire career, and hopefully we'll never have to spend any more time there. It's a bizarre world in a lot of ways.
Spoiler alert, I think you may need to spend more time there. So let me ask about trade, because I read an analysis of the election results this morning, which said Democrats won some things, Republicans won some things, trade lost everything, that the new Congress on both the left and the right is going to be more hostile to global trade. There is a shrinking public constituency for global trade, not only in the United States, but in many parts of the world. How can that be rebuilt?
I think it's a really tough question. I think the challenge is, okay, NAFTA, and now the new agreement. I mean, the new agreement that's been put forth is really a good agreement and a modernization of the agreement that was in place. But if you're honest with yourselves, depending on what side of the aisle you're on, I think that agreement could have been put together in the first 6 months without all the rhetoric, without alienating our two most important neighbors and allies, and disrupting a supply chain and creating just uncertainty, volatility in the markets that just wasn't necessary. I think I've got a slightly different view on the trade issue. I think the trade issue is fundamentally coming down to is we're going to cut it. We'll have an agreement with Europe, and that'll be some adjustment, but a move forward. Because relatively speaking, the trade with Europe is fair. It's balanced. There's a few things on both sides, and they'll try to find a thing. I think with Korea, there's a deal that's been such. Some of the Asian countries. Fundamentally, there's a problem with China, and anybody who doesn't recognize it is just got their heads in the ground. There's a trade problem with China. 1997 came into the WTO, appropriate agreement for a developing economy that was per capita GDP was so far behind the rest of the world and everything else. But I can tell you, as someone who's got a big business in China, does a lot of business in China, it is not a balanced situation. And the president, whether you like him or dislike him, is right. It is not balanced. Now, the methodology and how we get there, we could disagree about, but something needs to be done, and it does need to be addressed. Their barriers to entry are ridiculous. The technology displacement is way skewed to one side, and dealing with the Chinese, what I found is the tough guy approach works much better than the diplomatic approach all the way. So hopefully there's an agreement, there's a middle ground. We don't need to win every issue today. It can be more of a transition as you move forward. I think that's the way to think about it, but fundamentally it needs to be addressed. And I think if I had more of a say in it, we would have built more of the alliances around the world. We wouldn't have left the TPP agreement, because I think that actually isolated China in Asia and would have given us more of a lever. So I think there's some things that could be done that can make it stronger. But I think it's a fight that's going to happen, and I don't like it because it's going to put a lot of pressure on my supply chain. It's going to create disruption. I guess the one thing I would say is, right now, apparel as a category is not included in the tariffs for a lot of good reasons. I don't think in any way we want that industry back here in the United States. We don't want to compete with Bangladesh, Cambodia, Africa. We want to compete with Germany, China, and Japan, and Korea for manufacturing jobs, not in the lowest level of manufacturing. But I do think that we really need to move it forward in a positive way. But the uncertainty that it creates is, there's this threat that in January, everything will be hit with a 25% tariff. I don't even know what to do. I mean, in our industry, we're sitting around a table saying, well, if it goes into effect, there's going to be tens of millions of garments coming in, units of T-shirts and jeans and suits and ties and dress shirts coming into our warehouses in the next 3 months with tickets on them and prices. But if those goods are going to come in with a 25% tariff, we couldn't even physically change the tickets and the prices for 6 months, given the supply chain. You just can't do it. So we're going to have to eat that 25% tariff. There's no reaction. There's no way to react to that in a way that's not going to be totally disruptive and change the course. So, I would hope that there would be more thoughtful way to do it than just bang, here's a 25% tariff.
That sounds right to me.
Mm-hmm.
More thoughtful approach is needed. Let's shift a little bit to some of the things that PVH has been doing recently some new commitments on sustainability. So PVH has signed up with the RE100, commitment to 100% renewable energy. What drove that decision?
Look, I think as our industry, as an industry, is I guess ranked the second worst industry when you take in all textiles, apparel, footwear, accessories, leather, from creating and polluting water and having really a negative impact on the environment. And I think as an industry, we need to take more of a leadership role. And being the second largest apparel company with, brands that totally resonate, it's a position that we've really tried to take moving that forward and trying to create a level playing field within the industry. What you don't want to be, first of all, nobody wants to pollute waters and do all these things. But at the same time, you don't want to be put in a competitive disadvantage if you're doing all the right things, and that drives a 10% cost increase, but your competitors necessarily aren't doing those things, you're at a disadvantage. So trying to create a playing field and a blueprint that the industry can really embrace and move forward with, and trying to take a leadership position on those things. I guess just to take an example is, I think what we're always trying to be a pioneer when it comes to sourcing around the world, and Africa is the major area of development that can be, given its natural resources, its population, a very engaged workforce, well-educated in especially sub-Saharan Africa.
You're very active in Ethiopia.
And Ethiopia, Kenya, and throughout that whole region in Eastern Africa, is I think there's a model that we're trying to put in place that doesn't follow what happened in Asia. Basically what happened in Asia, everybody just went in, everybody just opened factories, and there was no forethought about how the factories were. So in Bangladesh, where there's really a limited land supply, especially in the cities where the population is and where your workforce is, what people did is they built tenements and 15-story buildings and put factories in those things. And just the nature of that, as opposed to maybe in China where it's more like a football field and you're on the second and third floor. When there's a fire in China, people just get out of the factories. When there's a fire in Bangladesh and the fire truck rolls up and the tallest ladder in the whole country goes to the fourth story, it's a tragedy. People are trapped. We've seen it happen, the safety and the environment. So there was no forethought. There was no partnership with government. There was no partnership with labor and the NGO community to really think about how are we going to build this supply chain going forward. So for the last 5 years, it's been remediation. Let's fix what's broken. Let's try and do better. In Africa, we approached it a different way. We partnered. We developed industrial parks where water filtration was mandated in the park. It had to be done a certain way. Labor standards were put in place. The payment and way the employees were paid. So creating a level playing field across the whole thing and doing it in a way with the end in mind, as opposed to with just letting it happen. Yeah. Also engaging the U.S. government and really making the business case to say there's a duty-free relationship out of Africa, certain parts, and that was being updated every 2 and 3 years. How do you make $1 million capital investments with a 2 or 3 year time frame that you're constantly worried is something political going to happen that's going to change it? So we were able to convince the government to enter into a 10-year agreement where there was a return on investment, and it's been a major win. We invested millions of dollars developing our own factories, developing vertical textile, and at the same time doing it in a way that is very sustainable for the environment, developing and training a workforce that's moving from an agricultural base to beginning manufacturing that will benefit the population, working with governments. And one of the big issues throughout all of Africa has been the corruption of government and all the issues that go along with that, but really working with a number of governments that really understand it and and are true partners in trying to develop it. So it's not perfect, but it's really off to a great start, and I think it's going to become a major base for us that we could be very proud of, but would also be a competitive advantage.
Let me bring us from Africa to this room. So you've got around 30 people here with you from PVH, which is a great showing. We think it's the largest group from a single company that's ever come to the BSR conference.
Fans.
Thank you for that. For the last several years, in addition to people from the team working at PVH, a handful of directors, board members have come to the BSR conference. So why does that happen? Why is that important? What do you hope that your colleagues, your board members, will take away from this and apply to what they do every day?
So I think a couple of things is, if you want, look, there's two ways to manage this corporate social responsibility initiative. One is to manage it purely from a risk-based point of view, and protecting your, CYA, cover your ass, and
I thought that was Catholic Youth Association.
Yeah.
We've heard worse. Don't worry, Manny.
What was I talking about? So I think that's really, and I think that was 10 years ago. That was, for all practical purposes, that was corporate responsibility in America. And I think changing that to making sustainability part of your business strategy, but it's much more than that. I think it needs to be. You need to be as transparent about your initiatives on the social responsibility front as you are on your financial reporting front. And if you're willing to issue an annual report on your results and the business results and what's going on, we decided 12 years ago, I think, to start reporting our results from a corporate social, putting goals out there, trying to do it in a way, and it started off very sophomoric and has developed into something that we're all very proud of, but with true measurements and goals, and talking about when we don't reach the goals and holding ourselves accountable. We're moving forward, putting a spin on it a little bit, but it's not there, but we're moving forward. But really, and I think when you do that, when it becomes something that you're measuring yourself against, it becomes part of your business strategy, it becomes the transparency and the curtains go up. I think it does a couple of things for you. One, it makes it, now you're holding yourself accountable, so you got to deal with it. You can't just brush it aside. And second, and then getting the board commitment. On our board, we have a social responsibility committee that's very active, dealing with all the issues. Same way we have a financial audit committee, and with the same kind of governance structure that goes along with that. And I think by having those things, it forces you to deal with it, to measure yourself against it, constantly think about it, forces the management team to deal with it, because it's part of their overall goals, strategy, incentives. They're being measured against it. It's the only way from my point of view, to really get it front and center. So transparency, reporting, and then accountability. And I think that ties back into our core values.
Last question for you. We put out a set of scenarios last night, doing business in 2030. We know.
I hope you don't think I read it all.
All right, we're done here. We're done here. You've got 12 years, don't worry about it. Whether you've read them or not, and you can feel free to, if you haven't.
I peruse them, let's put it that way.
You peruse them. I'll take that, I'll take that. Manufacturing models are changing, we all know that. How do you think supply chains will be different over the next 10 years than they are today? And what are the implications for social performance, environmental performance, et cetera?
I think there's more partnerships being built. I think I was at Wharton this week. We had our senior leadership group going through training, and dealing with artificial intelligence and all these things. And when that stuff starts to get discussed, and we start talking about the internet and everything, that's usually when I start to feel like a dinosaur in the room as it moves forward.
Read our scenarios, that'll help.
It'll be helpful. So I think there is, I mean, this could go a couple of different ways. I really do think it is, and there are some, for me, there's some real flashing yellow, red lights out there. I think the biggest fundamental issue we're dealing with today is inequality from an economic point of view. And it's pretty hard to argue globally, not just in the United States, but globally, that the top 1% or the top 10% haven't gotten 90% of the benefits the last 10 years that have come out of that. And the idea of trickle down, it works, but it doesn't work. I mean, there needs to be some guidance and some regulations. And I think the partnerships with associates, with training, I think there's some real concerns when I look out there, especially for our industry, which you could see more and more automation coming into it. If you walk into our warehouses today versus 15 years ago, 10 years ago, you'll see a lot less people than you would have, and all of a sudden you see these forklifts moving there, and the first thing you realize is nobody's driving them, and they're picking out boxes and throwing them onto a conveyor belt, getting put into a container or put into a truck, and almost no human touch going on. Those were pretty good jobs, paying today's standards $20 an hour, which are disappearing. And I'm worrying that training and providing the workforce those abilities, we're going to become very skewed with if you're better educated, you get the right training, you're going to do fine in this global economy moving forward. And if you're not, we're going to leave a lot of people behind. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in the political landscape today. Is there's a bit of have and have-nots, not coming up with solutions that are truly addressing the issues, coming up with great politics and great political slogans across television, but really not coming up with solutions that are addressing it. And fundamentally, I think we know what to do. It's like everything else. Nobody wants to do it until you're being forced to do it. I think we know what we need to do with the deficit, but nobody wants to step up and do it until it'll become even more painful. But that's the way it seems our political process works.
One more question, maybe. Will the same dynamic that you mentioned where the forklift is moving around, will that happen in cut-so-finish facilities? Will we still need as many people as far away from the marketplace making our clothes in 10 years?
I think if labor rates don't start to accelerate, you'll see more automation in facilities, and you're starting to see it now. I think it's inevitable because there's pressure on cost where things are going. I think that'll change a couple of things. I think it will move manufacturing closer to markets because if you need less workforce and where it is, and I think one of the benefits that our industry, the toy industry, some of the light manufacturing industries have always done for developing economies because of the low cost of labor, we were the entry industries that went in first. We are the pioneers. That's why we're in Africa. That's why we were in Bangladesh first. That's why we're in China, and you could go back to Korea and Japan, really developing manufacturing capabilities at a much less technology-driven way, and that light manufacturing really starts to develop a workforce that then can migrate into much more sophisticated areas. I think as these processes get more automated, I think we're going to start to lose some of that, and that will change the supply chain and where goods are made and what the drivers of the difference are. Right now, from our industry and a number of industries, the pressure on costing, and if a pair of pants today, a shirt, a woven shirt today is the same retail price in America that it was 20, 25 years ago. So what's your alternative? Is you've got to, and the market wants you to grow 15% a year. What do you have? You have to find lower and lower cost of production in order to be competitive in that environment. Or you have to elevate your brands at the same time that consumers are willing to pay a premium for a Calvin Klein or a Tommy Hilfiger garment. versus, you know, private label garment at Kohl's or whatever. So you're competing with all that environment, and I think that's a real challenge.
Well, thank you. Manny, great insights, really appreciate it. Please join me in thanking Emanuel Chirico for joining us. Thank you. That's great.